Oh, the number of things that have gone wrong this weekend, Marie.
So what's gone wrong? What's the litany of stuff?
Oh my goodness. So first off, Katie isn't here.
Oh well.
Katie's been on an externship, and so every time Katie's gone and I have to cook for myself, I end up stabbing myself. And this time the stab is really bad. I seriously thought I had stabbed my way through my finger.
So
I was like, I'm gonna have to go to the hospital. And thank God this Band-Aid is like keeping the blood in. Like it's not as bad as I thought it was. But like, so okay, here's what happened. You know those dried sausages you can get at Whole Foods?
Yes. Yeah.
You can get them in other places too. If you like live in an area that has a big like Hispanic or like I mean, I guess even Germans have like dried sausage, whatever. But so like I'm used to them from like an Italian perspective, like you buy them at whatever. So the ones you buy at Whole Foods though, I really don't like the casing on them. They're like really the casing is like super gross on those ones. So I take the casing off of it before I eat them, right? Mm-hmm. And so I cut the dried sausage. I went to peel the thing off. And then, like a moron, it like wasn't coming. It was like stuck in like a crack or not like a crack, like a fold in the sausage meat. And I was like, I know, I can use this extremely sharp knife to get this out. And so I stabbed in to like get it off the thing. And instead I stabbed, just like the force of it stabbed way too hard, went right into my finger. Oh, it was bad, Marie. So that went bad. Dude. That went bad. I almost cut off my finger cutting sausage. Then, it's just been a whole series of disasters. We have these like lights on our balcony that we're not supposed to have, and so before someone came to visit the apartment, I like took the lights off so that the landlord wouldn't see we have these lights on our apartment balcony, right? And shattered one of the lights, and there's just glass out there now. It's like a death trap. It's really not been going great. Anyways, dear listeners. A look into the life of me, don't let anyone tell you a degree is worth anything, because you know what? I got a PhD. Dude, I can hardly take care of myself.
We should have the mad scientist death pool about what is going to finally do in Dr. Christopher Cogswell. Will it be a knife?
It's gonna be something
broken
stupid.
Glass.
It's gonna be something stupid. It's gonna be like I accidentally eat a whole thing of dishwasher detergent or something, and like Katie's at home, so I just die.
And I assume you're not on the first floor. Since you said balcony, I'm assuming you're up a level.
No, we're on the top floor, 5th floor.
Oh, there we have it.
I dropped my cell phone off of that once.
I am now drawing up some odds. For if not a death pool, at least grievous bodily harm. At least an urgent care visit.
It's already happened. It's already happening, Marie. It's happening all around us.
You could come up with like, it is like an equation. It would be like the length of time that Katie's gone, the amount of like energy you have to decide to do some sort of like, I know what I'm going to do this weekend. I think I'm going to
bungee jumping.
I think I'm going to try and fix the roof or whatever it is, right? I'm going to hang pictures, right? Times, that where you are, like if you're above 5th floor, I think that looks pretty good. I think that looks pretty good for a bet pool.
All right. Well, this week we're talking about sexism in science,
and not Christopher Cogswell actually dying.
No, we're not talking about my death just yet. Although
we're gonna save that for Sweeps Week.
Although, when I do get grievously bodily harmed, I do hope we cover it on the show, or at least you do, Marie, in my absence. So this episode, we are talking about sexism in the sciences. We actually have a really great episode planned. We had a really good interview too with a journalist who's covering this topic right now, or he has covered it in the past, Micah Emmel-Duke, that you'll be hearing here too. And we're just going to talk about this issue that really has been, in some ways, coming to a head, I think, finally. Because it's been such an issue over time, but we've kind of not given it the kind of attention that it deserves. So we're going to go into it and talk about this a little bit more, and really just dig into this topic.
All right.
Welcome to the Mad Scientist Podcast. This week's episode: Sexism in Science.
Chris put down that knife, Don't get near anything sharp. Stay alive for Katie's sake.
And the cats, at least until Kitty gets back.
Oh my God, the cats would just eat you, so that's okay.
Oh yeah, the cats would be fine.
Mm-hmm. Cats would be good.
So
cats are looking at you like, that's right, man. Go ahead.
That's right.
Fight with that sausage some more.
You're so good. We can eat you and the sausage then. So this week, like we said, it's fine.
Yeah.
We're delving into sexism in science, and specifically, we're talking about, it's a larger, I think, question or a larger issue than we usually give credit to, especially as scientists. We hear about it. You do hear about it from time to time, but when you hear about it, you kind of, I don't know. I think people tend to think that it's not.
Doesn't happen in college. Doesn't happen in post-grad. Doesn't happen in the sciences where it's, where you're supposed to have more. What's the word I'm looking for? You're supposed to be above that type of thing in some ways. I mean, of course, that's a total myth, right? It's like, I look at this as like basically, especially with this article, is almost like this tiny, thin little sliver of what is completely rampant behavior, but hasn't really come out yet, which is sexism in college, and sort of in higher education.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways.
So,
Yeah,
so this all really came about. So there have been a couple of really big name issues that have come up, or big name scientists, I guess, that have been kind of taken down by these bad actions that they performed or are alleged to have performed. One of the bigger problems with this is that there is corroboration from the point of view of the victims, but it can be very, very hard for these claims to be proven. And so really alleged, I guess, is the best that we can say. But I think as we get into it, I think it's going to, this is alleged like Casey Anthony is alleged to have killed her daughter, right? Like, it's like, oh, she did it. Okay, it's fine.
dark.
So
Wait, dark fast.
Pretty dark.
An alleged, again, as a legal term, insofar as if you were going to bring criminal charges against someone to serve time, or even civil to recoup money against the institution or the individual, that requires a certain burden of proof, which is pretty big, and it's like, I think that's made out to be even more of a hurdle when women are thinking of coming forward with things like this.
Yeah. So here's, I guess, kind of the groundwork for this, right? So first off, in the sciences, right, we have the sciences are a weird field in general for someone to become a professional in, because there is like an extended, almost apprenticeship period between undergraduate and postdoctoral studies, right? And we've touched on this a bit in our previous episodes on like how science actually happens and what it takes to become a scientist and all this other stuff. But the basic idea is that you, in undergraduate, you try to find a professor that you want to do research with oftentimes. And in doing that research in their lab, and really that research, by research, what I mean for undergraduates, that usually means cleaning dishes and pipetting stuff and helping out a grad student and whatever, right? And sometimes it takes on a more hands-on role, and that's great when that does happen. But a lot of the times it's kind of a formal apprenticeship. Like you're just you're starting to get your hands dirty, but you aren't running experiments on your own. You then apply to graduate school and you become a graduate student, and that relationship between graduate student and advisor is very weird. Even in the best cases where nothing improper happens, it is a weird relationship, right? Because
yeah, like, why is it weird? Like, just without any kind of impropriety happening, it seems really strange in a lot of, like, it seems like it should be a healthy mentorship in the best of all possible worlds, but I can imagine that happens.
It's not even a mentorship though. It's more like, it really is very akin to, you look at Game of Thrones or like any of those things. Well, seriously, like when Arya becomes the apprentice, faceless man,
girl
faceless
has
woman,
no
whatever.
name.
Exactly. Yes. It's actually more similar to that relationship almost, where you are with if your advisor isn't physically with you most of the day, every day for those 5 years, they're at least texting or emailing you. You become
to kill people?
Hopefully not. You become a constant, like they become a constant part of your life. Even still, my advisor, we talk to each other probably once a week. Like that, it's a much closer relationship, I think, than people realize at first. And it is very much so almost like the mentor and mentee, but it's almost, I think, again, more similar to like the master and the student, or like that relationship means more than it did previously, right? Because this person is really, they are literally paying for you directly. Like their grant money pays your salary, right? And you're doing research for them. So you're constantly at their beck and call. So 24 hours a day, some advisors expect you to, I mean, most advisors, I think all advisors, honestly, expect you to at least answer a phone call if it comes in at night. Because that means something weird is happening, right? That's out of the ordinary. They expect you to take responsibility for this work in this lab and everything else that happens in it. So you're expected to be available. If someone wants to use a piece of equipment in your lab, you should be there. You're expected to go to conferences and travel with your advisor and, kind of be around with them. And, it's almost like I hesitate to say this because it's going to sound stupid, but it's almost like Batman and Robin relationship, where this is like a wealthy person who's wealthy in the sense that they're paying your lifestyle at least.
Well, they're grant. They're not. It's not coming out of their pocket.
No, but it's coming out of their grant money that came from their work and their name, right?
But the work you're doing is all on their behest, right? It's like it will make or break their hypothesis, right?
Not always. No, not always. Oh. Sometimes students are given more free reign than that. But I guess, but I guess what I'm trying to get across is that it's much more of an almost parental relationship, right? You become a part of this person's life and they become a part of yours.
Or vigilante in their ward.
Well, just from closeness and working relationship and the amount of energy and time that you spend together. And really, again, that relationship does not end at graduation. I'm, like I said, still working on papers and textbook chapters and ideas and talking to the, graduate students that are in the lab now, email me for questions and help. You know what I mean? Like that relationship does not get severed, and it remains even closer if you go into academics, right? If you stay as a hopeful to become a professor, then usually the way it works is after graduate school, after you get your PhD, you become a postdoc. Usually that means a postdoc in a lab of one of your professor's friends, right? And so again, that relationship, that like pedigree of science is extremely important to the way science is done, for better or for worse, right? And then when you finally get done with your postdoc, if you only have one, sometimes you have many, and go out to try to become a professor, those are the people you're looking towards to be like, hey, do you know someone at whatever, the University of Pennsylvania? Can you get me in? Do you know someone in Michigan? Do you know someone wherever? Right? Like, these are the folks that are making those connections for you and having you now come give research talks to make your name and to get you into the field. So
now, do you feel like your example of how you've gone about it is pretty representative, or is it more exemplary? Like, I look at you and I think that you're actually probably more an exemplary example of that type of success and that type of relationship. Or do you feel like that there's sort of a spectrum, and some people may or may not, like they may have not as close of a relationship, or do you know what I mean? It's like, I totally get what you're saying. I'm just kind of curious if that is indicative of like what sort of percentage.
Right. There is certainly a spectrum, right? So I would say it's interesting. The younger the professor, or the the earlier into their career, the closer the relationship usually is, because they're trying. First off, they remember being a grad student, right, more closely. They also are trying to make their name, so they really need their grad students to do well, right? Because it's going to make or break their career. If, on the other hand, you start to work in a lab with a professor who's, you know, got tenure, he's been tenured for 30 years, he or she, they don't care necessarily. Like, the best ones will care, right, how well you do, but I would say the vast majority, though, are kind of more hands-off in their approach, because they know, you know, my work is going to continue. I'm going to start letting people be more creative with their work, is one way to look at it. Another way to look at it is, you know, they have 50 students, some of them 50, 60 students. How it's not even possible for them to, if they give an hour to every student a week, there's no time for anything else. Right. And so in those cases, the postdoc's role becomes more important than the professor's, in some ways, at least for the individual student, because the postdoc is the one that's guiding their research. Does that make sense? So
totally.
Regardless, though, there is some relationship in there that is extremely close, that involves traveling together, that involves being together every hour of most days, right? Like that.
Well, and this is the person that's going to vouch for you. This is the person that's going to be your credibility and the lens of your success in a lot of ways.
100%. So it becomes a very big, I think, a big issue in that setting is very, very fertile for impropriety, right? It's even more than a normal, say, job, right? So I would say that it does really depend, but that chance is still there, 100% for everyone, right? So very, very easy for things to go sideways, let's say.
But I would say that, you know, in working in sort of a working field, you have certain relationships that may start to mirror that after a period of time within companies.
100%.
Right.
Well,
like
yeah.
If you're working for someone, they are, and they are mentoring you for you know, succession or whatever it looks like, those types of things come up there as well. Maybe not to the extent that it seems like within your field, it's a very narrow, it's sort of more of a narrow group of people, or not a narrow group of people, but there's definitely maybe it is a smaller pool of people that you're going to school with, or that you are being, I don't want to say farmed out to, because that sounds terrible, but that you are going to other labs and that are coming in to borrow your equipment and stuff like that. That there's not you couldn't go somewhere else to get away from things.
That's the problem, right? Yeah. Is that because there is this big, like, it's in some ways, again, it's very similar to a family situation where it's like, if you have a huge problem against an aunt or an uncle or something, or a mother or father or whatever, well, you know what I mean? Unless the rest of the family decides they also have that problem with them, you're kind of out of luck, right? You either have to kind of swallow it and move, somehow find some way to continue going to family events, or you have to decide that, you know what, this just isn't a thing that I can have in my life, right? Because it's not good. And sometimes, and I would say sometimes it's the family's fault, right? Like, it's not, this isn't to say that it's up to the victim to make that decision. All I'm saying is that it's a very similar feel, I guess, in that let's put it this way, if you're a student who comes out and says that your professor has sexually assaulted you, your future as a scientist is pretty much over. That's just kind of the reality as it stands right now, and that's terrible. That's no good. Right?
Right. But I think the other thing is, you have to, even before you can make that decision, you have to realize that there's something that's wrong, right? And I think that's something that a lot of women in the sciences and in general are now starting to realize about this behavior. Like, it's been going on for so long, but maybe they've it's such status quo, right? That it's not, they've not seen it as, a violation of themselves. It's just been sort of, like as soon as you start to realize that, then you have to have, well, this is what I could do, or this is what I don't have to do. But I'm sure that there's a whole bunch of women who have graduated from the sciences that look back now and are like, yes, that was definitely sexual harassment. Yes, that was definitely messed up. I shouldn't have put up with that type of thing as well.
Yeah. So here's the challenge with that, right? So let's put some historical context on this whole idea, right? Mm-hmm. So there has been an ongoing issue about women being more involved in STEM in particular, right? And part of that is there's larger questions here about is STEM, like, is it important that more people generally become involved in STEM? Really? Are we putting too much placement or too much importance on science, technology, engineering, medicine, when we should also be, the world has, in some ways, the West has never been more replete with splendor and money and, gold and chariots and whatever, right? Like, we have never been more disgustingly rich in some ways in the West, yet we are still focusing on people getting jobs. Like, well, why is that even a thing? But regardless of that whole question of like, or not jobs, but you don't need that many people building bridges if all the bridges have already been built, right? Like, eventually you would think that the penultimate or the pinnacle of a society would be, all right, we've done enough, we've done well enough that we can all have enough to eat, whatever. Now people can start doing jobs where we pay for art, or we pay for creativity, or we pay for, whatever that is. And in some industries we see that happening, and others we don't. Whatever. Hold
on. But hold on with that. I mean, just as the flip side of that, though, it's like, well, you can't say that that's you can't say that that's the case with STEM. Like, do we need more people in STEM in general? Is what the question is, right?
Yes.
Yeah, men or women. Well, yeah, absolutely. My thing is, like, you would because again, there's still a lot of work to do. I would guess. Right?
I don't know. I think it's a topic for another episode, but I would actually push back and say that really there are probably a lot of people in STEM that shouldn't be there because they don't actually care about STEM. They care about making money. Right?
Well,
so like,
yeah, but maybe, okay, keep going.
Anyways, okay. So if we look at the current trends for the sciences, there have been a lot of big gains, right? So 69% of women, 69% of students in medical technology degrees are women. 77% of veterinary science are female. In fact, the veterinary field is so dried up with men. They have so few men that they actually will give scholarships for male vet students.
Huh.
It's one of the few fields where actually, they specifically look for male candidates. Psychology, it's a 79% are female. Anthropology 72, ophthalmics 69, anatomy, physiology, pathology 64, zoology 63, forensics, archaeology 61, pharmacology, toxicology, pharmacy 61%. This is generally true for biological sciences, where actually in some ways it is considered a traditionally female field where they are healing people, right? It's kind of, since, in my mind, medicine, biology, those kinds of fields there's a less of a barrier for females to get involved in them because nursing has always been such a big deal, because the role of the medicine woman has always been such a big deal, the midwife. Like, women in some ways historically have always been involved in these fields, not at the same rate, and this is awesome that they're getting involved in this way. But to me, there's a difference between saying there's a whole bunch of women that are studying, veterinary stuff, that are studying biology or medicine or whatever, then, like, that's great in that one field that we are making tremendous strides. That's phenomenal. But if we look at other fields, so for instance, if we look at the percentage of women in physics, so it's 49% in social and life sciences, it is 20% in physics.
So are these people that are in school for it, or are these people that are actually using it going on for employment?
No, these are students. These are students who obtain a bachelor's. So these are students who retain a bachelor's degree in these fields.
Okay.
So computer science, it's like 20%, physics 20%, engineering 20%, math, it's around bachelor's degrees around 42%, and then it skyrockets past there towards social sciences, biosciences, medicine, right? Those are the values where in some cases actually females outnumber male candidates, right? So
yeah, well, again, like not to commoditize it, but I think that these figures make a certain amount of sense until, when you're trying to equate like if they're having success or if they are at a higher percentage. I mean, you ultimately have to look at how much money they make, right?
Yeah. So actually that's another big important point. Another important point of this is that actually there's still a gender pay gap in the sciences, right?
Oh, yeah.
There's also a significant stereotype against raising a family, basically, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you look at students, if they decide to go on to doctorate degrees, right? Female students will say, well, no, we don't want to because we want to raise families, or we want to focus on other parts of our life, right? Because generally a PhD is a extremely time consuming, difficult thing, right? And so it's become kind of a, what's the word? So this is a quote here from Psychology Today. Quote, some 11 years after the publication of Pinker's seminal text, which is a text on sexism in science, right? The scholars Marianne Mason, Nicholas Wolfinger, and Mark Goulden asked if family formation mattered in the ivory tower. Their book was called Do Babies Matter? And they answered their question with a resounding yes. Their research found that, in general, women who were successful in the academy delayed having children and had fewer children than they had hoped for. And a significant proportion of women who had hoped to form families at some point forewent parenthood altogether. Among graduate students that Marianne Mason had surveyed, more than half of men and more than 2/3 of women view academic careers as being in conflict with family life. When female graduates were asked why they didn't continue on with academic careers after PhD completion, the most commonly reported reasons were, quote, other life interests, and, quote, wanting to focus on children, end quote. So there is a huge bias that still exists, I would say, where people view that if a female is going to go get a PhD, or if someone who, even a male who seems family oriented, that, and they tell you this when you apply to schools, if they don't think that you're going to continue on as a professor, some programs will just turn you away because it doesn't help them to create a PhD who goes in industry, right? Like that does not help them. That does not help their pedigree. What helps them is churning out more professors. So in the sense of, I would say, choosing family life or a podcast or, art, any kind of other hobby or other thing that you think is important in your life, graduate school science kind of eats that up, right? And the assumption is that you're going to let it eat it up. Well,
the assumption is that you're going to let it eat it up if you're a woman.
Well,
but
sure.
The assumption for a man is that's not going to be a problem. You could have a family and be a professor.
What I mean to say is that the assumption is that you will allow your PhD studies and your science to overtake all of your other concerns or plans.
Right. But that's probably, yes. But they probably don't give that speech to men necessarily. Like that concern, I think, again, like the base root of that concern is inherently sexist.
Sure, absolutely.
That like you are going to, because you are going to have kids, or because you are, then you will have to have some sort of a decision, and the commitment and the responsibility is only on one gender, and it's not on men. So it's not like that same conversation is happening, or that, and that's the case everywhere, like just not just in sciences, but across the board. Like if you are going to do anything, you have to make a decision on one or the other, or if one is more important than the other. But that duality doesn't exist for an entire other gender, which is never, again, that's an unwinnable or an untenable situation. It's an unsolvable problem, because you're not, and it's like there's a huge amount of books and rhetoric that's been put behind, can she have it all, wanting it all, having it all, and it's like none of that has ever been applied to men.
Yeah,
which is sort of the problem in a lot of the ways.
Absolutely. Well. No, yeah, for sure. And I think that in many, so I think actually though, for a lot of, even say for that question of how do we deal with someone deciding to have, like, if I apply to a job,
yep,
and in my job interview I was like, oh, by the way, I do this podcast and it's gonna take up 25% of my time. Mm-hmm. Even at work, I'm gonna be thinking about it, I'm gonna be texting about it, I'm gonna be thinking about it, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I would think that a job might be like, well, we're not gonna hire you then, right? And thank God it doesn't take up 25% of my thinking time at work, right? But I wonder if the same, because like I wonder if the same kind of thinking, it's unfair that it gets applied to women primarily, because men can definitely be involved with their families too, and sometimes women decide not to have kids, right? Like that's also super fine and super normal. I wonder though if, like, what is the argument to say that it should be something that we don't consider, I guess. Do you know what I mean? Like, to play devil's advocate.
Well, to play devil's advocate, you could quit after a week. You could go to a different school. Like, there's no guarantee on anything for anybody. But to make the assumption that a woman is going to take a course of action or has to choose one or the other, mm-hmm. or that you are even behest to explain the fact that you have a podcast to an employer, says that you are at a disadvantage, right?
And I
expected, yeah. Well, and I get the analogy, like, but that in itself is like, again, is not something that, if again, like, if I look at it, if I look at the situations where I have been questioned about leave or maternity or having to take care of a family, versus the times that my husband hasn't been, there's still, even to this day, a very clear difference in responsibility.
I get what you're. Yeah, I think the central point there, or the thing that really mm-hmm. destroys the devil's advocate argument I was making, is that the assumption is that you will, because you're a woman, the assumption is that, well, she's going to want to have a kid and that kid's going to interfere with our work. Right? Oh. Whereas if they saw a guy who came in a hockey jersey, they wouldn't be like, that guy must love hockey. Around the Stanley Cup time, he's going to be useless. We shouldn't hire him. Right? Like, it's the same kind of jump. Right. It's the same jump in logic.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the other thing too. If a guy comes in with a wedding ring, they don't assume, oh, he's going to be too busy taking care of his kids to really focus on work. He's not going to want to go on business trips. We shouldn't hire him. 100%. Mm-hmm. That assumption does not exist.
Yeah.
So
I think anything beyond that assumption is almost impossible to deleverage in school, in work, in anything. That's sort of the faulty baseline that destroys any kind of rationalization or explanation going out of it, in my opinion.
No, totally. Yeah. So there are these, I think, and we can even go back to kind of the original idea, right, of even say as a student, right, mm-hmm. there is a bias amongst, so this is a quote from harvard.edu, cfa.harvard.edu. It's Women in STEM Resources, which is actually a really great website. And so they talk about different things about gender bias and sex bias and whatever. And so these are two, I think, that are very interesting. The first is that faculty are actually biased towards male students. And this is from a paper from Moss, Rakison et al., 2012. So, quote, the study used a clever design in which an application modified to be either from Jennifer or John was given to a male or female faculty member for evaluation. Evaluators in biology, chemistry, and physics departments at 6 highly ranked research universities were told the resume was real and that the evaluation would be used to develop mentoring materials for science students. There were 2 key findings. First, Jennifer received significantly lower ratings than John, and second, male and female evaluators were equally likely to give Jennifer lower ratings. The ratings pertained to competence, hireability, and whether the candidate was deserving of mentoring. The evaluators made lower salary recommendations by about 12% for Jennifer relative to John. And an important note here, biology professors, for example, whose classes can be greater than 50% female, were just as biased as physicists. Women professors were just as biased as men. Junior professors were just as biased as seniors. So even in the classroom, there is a bias against female students. And then there's another one here that I think is also very interesting, which is that students are significantly biased towards female lecturers, or toward female lecturers. So this is from Mengel et al. In 2017. Quote, evaluations place female lecturers, particularly junior ones, 37 slots below male ones. This is largely driven by male student evaluations and more pronounced in mathematical courses, though female students also rated female lecturers lower. In the study, the students had the same course materials, on average had the same grades and the same contact hours, etc. Another sad and disturbing study showed the same effect when the true gender of the professor was unknown in an online course, but evaluations were higher for the instructors that were given a male identity. The study involved German, Asian, Dutch, and European students. This is especially important to consider for promotions, since women will appear objectively less qualified than an equally male lecturer and may influence tenure rates. So again, there is an implicit bias against female professors. Like, the part of these that I think is the most interesting is, in both of these studies, they got rid of the possibility that the male lecturers or female lecturers are just different or worse or better lecturers, right? In the online course, they didn't know what the lecturer's gender was, and then by changing the identity of the lecturer, the male lecturer was given better grades, right? Yes. And the same thing in this other one where a male name is given better scores on hireability and things like that than a female name. It's
systemic.
Yeah, so it's not like a glass ceiling or something where it's just these old dudes smoking pipes with tweed suits on and leather patches on their elbows. This is students too who get into the classroom and think,
right. It's women students. I mean, we haven't even got, like, within, feminism and within women, women of color, especially, versus white women such as myself have even a worse, by exponential worse chance to bridge a gap for earning, or to be able to, have have people give them the benefit of the doubt in regards to, what we're talking about, the gender role for family versus not family and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, like, I don't doubt it. It's a systemic thing. Like, it's like women inherently have, you see, the thing is I'm not surprised by any of that. Like, to me, it would be amazing if anything else came out of that wasn't like people self-identifying and seeing other women and not rating them as highly as a man.
Sure. Now, the other thing that's really interesting is that so this is another important point here. This is again from that cfa.harvard.edu site. Gender pay gap persists. So, quote, the NSF, so the National Science Foundation, looked at the pay gap for recent PhDs across all STEM fields in permanent employment, either inside or outside academia, and found in every one except health sciences, which was equal, women's salaries significantly trailed men's. Overall, the median salary of $92,000 for men was 24% higher than the $74,000 salary for women. In biomedical and biological sciences, women earned $67,500 to men's $77,000. In geosciences, atmospheric and ocean sciences, women earned $65,000 to men's $71,000. In physics and astronomy, women earned $89,000 to men's $100,000. In engineering, women earned $92,000 to men's $100,000. Women had lower salaries in all fields of social sciences, including psychology and economics. So, and this is true as well across their entire. This is true, like the median of their career, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is not this is not just like in your first year or something.
Nope.
This
or
is
starting out, or you're just starting to manage people, all that stuff. No,
right, and this is true even in their postdoctoral study, what they're paid for postdoctoral study, right?
Yep.
So male students are paid more than female students are, which is very, very interesting in my mind. So there is, these gaps exist and they are significant. And, you know, we're not even talking yet about the more serious stuff, which is the actual sexual assault and harassment, right?
Yeah,
like this is like the
icing on this cake,
right.
on this cake made of broken glass,
right,
and,
right.
Sticks. You've got the poop icing, which is just sexual harassment on top of it.
Right. So
Sweet.
So we're gonna jump in now to our interview with So I actually did this interview a little while ago at this point, which was super duper interesting. And so we're going to jump right into it here. So this is our interview with Micah Emmel-Duke, who wrote a really great article here. And let's just get into it. Yeah, so let's just dive right in. So actually, first off, thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Sure, no problem. So you know, we're a show that kind of talks about science and philosophy together, and kind of talks about the weird side of stuff. Usually we're kind of, you know, we try to be a little bit less heavy, I guess, but you know, this is a really important topic, I think, that you highlighted in this article that you did. So the article, for those that don't know, the one that I saw is How the University of Minnesota Hides Its Professors' Sexual Harassment on City Pages. And actually, I had originally seen that on Twitter, actually. So why don't you give us a little bit of info? So, you know, without kind of going into the specifics and stuff, but how did you find out about this story?
Yeah, I had just, the way I started in the story was I just heard through the grapevine, you know, so-and-so is at the University of Minnesota, in a graduate program, and there's a really unfair or, you know, really bad sexual harassment kind of thing happening. And I first heard about this maybe a year and a half ago. And I said, you know, well, okay, let me know, you know, we'll see what happens as the investigation goes on, things like that. So there was a formal investigation from the university. There was eventually, some discipline and whatnot. So eventually I got a hold of I requested from the U some of the documents related to the case. And then some of that you see in the story on City Pages. And so I really started requesting this stuff around September, so most of that time from September to about April was just waiting for the university to give me documents, or to, you know, talk to the lawyers and decide they couldn't give me documents. But a lot of it just came down to what the university would provide and what we could do with that. So
sure, okay. So it is a large problem, this, you know, in graduate school. So I went through graduate school myself. Okay. You know, I went through in the sciences, and there is a huge power dynamic kind of, and it's unfair, right? In many ways. I mean, it's any power dynamic is usually unfair, right? You usually have kind of the person who has power over someone else. And so there's always moral or ethical questions about how to wield that kind of influence or power ethically, right? And in graduate school, it's especially, it's almost still stuck in the dark ages, right? Graduate students are kind of allowed to be what's the word? Graduate students are pretty much thought to be almost like indentured servants, right?
Mhm.
You work for this professor and you have to do what they say, and you never get a time, you don't go home if you're a graduate student, right? You're always on, you're always doing research, you're always supposed to be thinking and writing and whatever, and some professors are a lot better about that than others are. Thankfully my professor was very, very understanding of work-life balance. But, I had friends who were in the lab, Christmas morning, they were in the lab,
Mhm.
they were there all the time.
Yeah.
And it obviously, never went to the level that is being alleged in this article, right? But it is certainly, it's not something out of the realm of possibility at all, I think, for anyone who's ever been a graduate student. Have you heard anything else from the university?
They did respond. They gave an official, from their chief PR officer, Chuck Tombarges. I'm not sure if I'm saying that correctly. Sorry, Chuck. But they gave a response that basically said, this is a broader problem in our culture, and we're doing our best, and we're doing our training and things like that. And there's something to that. This is definitely a broad cultural problem that we're dealing with, but at the same time, um, the way they address it kind of seemed to, you know, just kind of seem to shirk a little bit of responsibility. Maybe they're just kind of like, well, we're doing what we can, so bear with us here. And it's kind of like, well, this is a really serious problem. This is something that significantly affects a lot of people, and those of us who aren't at the university or who aren't um, female uh,
Mhm.
are a lot more affected by it than those of us who are not. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting that, I guess, so my co-host Marie couldn't be with us right now for this interview. But it is kind of interesting, I think, that so academia is definitely still a male dominated field,
Mhm.
right? Especially the sciences,
Yeah.
and there are some fields that are definitely more male heavy than others. And actually biology, biological engineering, and chemical engineering tend to be a little bit more, those tend to be kind of more, have a higher ratio of, say, male to female people, right?
Okay.
Working in the fields. But it is kind of interesting, I think, that in many ways, this is a problem that's being addressed, we're two guys talking about this,
Mhm.
right?
Yep.
So it's kind of, we would love to get any female listeners. If you have any, thoughts on this or whatever, please let us know. I'd be happy to share them with you, for sure. So what do you think? Where do you think, have you been contacted, I guess, by any other people writing about this or any other universities?
Yeah. So I recently talked to some folks at the American Chemical and Engineering News.
Sure.
Which is a trade publication.
Mhm.
Um, they so they were just talking to me about, we're working on a similar story. Just want to kind of hear how you worked on yours, that kind of thing. So we talked about some of those kind of details. And I've had some other people contact me as far as, like to tell you more about some of the things at the University of Minnesota. So I'm working on those stories. And
Mhm.
obviously, if any of your listeners have their own stories to tell, I would be happy to talk to you.
Absolutely.
So, but yeah, I haven't talked to anybody outside of any other publications outside of CEN. So.
Sure. Yeah, it's, I get CEN like twice a month, I think. So
Mhm.
actually I'll be looking forward to that article when it finally drops.
Yeah, it seemed like they were going to go ahead, and it seemed like they had requested they might be doing something about some of the specific professors in the article that I did. So I'm not sure if it'll have my comments in it or anything.
Mhm. Sure. It's interesting. So why do you think, if looking at this graph here that you have, the substantiated misconduct complaints, sexual misconduct complaints against University of Minnesota employees, in from 2013 to 2017, the vast majority are in the Twin Cities,
Mm-hmm.
right? What do you think do you think that just comes down to a couple of bad players? Is it kind of a systemic issue that it's kind of, they look the other way? What do you believe the issue is?
Yeah, I'm not sure. So there's a couple parts playing there though. Is that so? One, the Twin Cities obviously is the biggest campus in the University of Minnesota's system, right?
Sure.
They have I'm not sure about the number, but 50,000 ish students if you include the undergrad, and the other campuses top out at like, I want to say Duluth is the next biggest at like 5,000, maybe 4,000,
Sure.
somewhere in there. So
it's
obviously you're going to
numbers.
get a lot more.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a numbers game, but even adjusting for that, you have some extra cases at the University of Minnesota that you wouldn't expect just based on the ratio. And I don't know. I mean, it might be just that the reporting and the outreach to students to encourage reporting is better at the university, at the Twin Cities campus. It might be that just the culture encourages that. I'm not exactly sure, but
it's really interesting. It's like, so I'm trying very hard to be very like reportery, I guess. But you know, I find it really interesting that, so this is a problem that I had heard about in graduate school the whole time I was there.
Okay.
Right, about professors who preyed on students or had, you know, would have a little bit too much to drink at conferences and would get kind of weird. And you know, I was always very surprised to hear those things in some ways, right? Because I think a lot of people, when they get into the sciences, they have this view of professors, especially, as being almost, you know, like a aseptic, you know, these figures of learning who are not human anymore, right? They just kind of, you know, I mean, it goes back to that same old joke when you were a kid, you know, you thought the teacher lived at the school.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? It's kind of the same thing. Like, you know, as you get older, that view, I don't think, goes away really. But a big part of the problem, in my view at least, is the tenure system, right? That it becomes extremely difficult to remove professors who are found to be doing these things, and especially the engineering science fields especially are dominated by like your career as a professor. You teach as you're getting older, right? You teach more as you stop doing research. But in the beginning of your career, it is research dominated, right? That's where you're getting the money, and you're the one then that's bringing money into the university. So there seems to be an interplay here between both a view of, you know, these are all smart people, these are all people that are, you know, trained and learned and whatever, and so therefore, you know, we don't expect them to become, I guess both, we don't expect the professors themselves to do something so heinous and so bad, right? But then also I think there's a view that, you know, unfortunately in society, I think there's still a view that people think that, you know, well, smart women don't put themselves in those situations, right? Did you come across any of that kind of feeling when you were reporting on this?
Don't think that I did, just because I didn't get really deep into the telling a lot of stories from the perspective of the women who were being harassed, just because outside of the documents,
Sure,
which are in the story, because a lot of people didn't want to go on record and didn't, you know, people don't want to have their names out there.
Sure, it makes sense.
But yeah, so there's the kind of the crux of the story is that the state laws, if a professor or really any employee at the university is found by a university investigation to have violated the sexual harassment policy, the office that does the investigating, if, you know, once they decide, they take that decision to the person's boss, and they say, do you want to, you know, here's the discipline that we have recommended in similar cases to this one around the university. They give that recommendation and the decision to the person's boss, and the boss says, okay, what do I want to do about this? And they can do a few things. They can make the punishment harsher. They can make it less harsh. They can do exactly what the recommendation says, or they can do nothing. If they do nothing, if they say, you know, well, I like this person, I think there's just a misunderstanding. Or if they say, well, you know, I'll talk to this person, but I don't think we need to put anything official in their file, things like that. Or if they say, you know what, this is so bad, I really have to fire the person, but I like them, I'm going to talk to them first. Whatever. If the employee resigns before official discipline happens, or if there's no discipline, then everything by state law is locked down. There's no that employee's name isn't made public in connection with that complaint. So that person can easily, or even if their supervisor doesn't come to them and say, "Hey, look, I gotta fire you, but maybe you want to resign first." Even if that doesn't happen, the employee might still say, like, "Yeah,
sure,
I expect I will get fired for this. I better resign earlier." Then it's very easy for them to go on just to resign and go get a new job at a different institution, or whether that's a university or maybe something in industry.
Sure.
Because their past history of bad behavior is not made public. And so a lot of that just kind of, and partly that's not the University of Minnesota's fault, right? They're just following state laws as far as what they can release about it. But also, the discipline, to my understanding, the way the discipline system works and the way that the delays in how long from the decision to the actual official discipline happening, those things they can control, and the amount that they redact when they do release these documents, things like that. So,
well, the other part of this, I think, that isn't being really talked about too much is what happens to the student after the report is made. And what I mean by that even is more, say, than just simply their professor doesn't like them or something. Academics, so the sciences and engineering especially are so rarefied at the top level of like PhD research, right? Where, even in my field, let's say where I did my PhD, there were probably, 100 is probably saying too many. There were probably 100 people alive who even knew what the heck I was talking about. And that wasn't because it was so complicated or anything. It was just because only 100 people ever cared. It's that's just kind of the way that this research happens, right? You get to a certain level where it becomes so specific.
Yeah.
And because of that, though, the goings on and the gossip and the problems and the, all this stuff, it spreads really quickly and very easily. And so even within, say, these major conferences, let's say I can only, again, speak from my own experience. So, let's say you're an engineer, a chemical engineer, and your professor is doing something that you don't like, you don't feel good about, or they're harassing you in some way. You make a complaint and then that professor doesn't get disciplined. Well, now what the heck do you do? Right? If you're 3 years, 2 years in your PhD, you have to start again at another lab? Will another lab even take you after, your professor gives a bad recommendation for you? You can't move schools. I mean, it's basically because these universities don't often support the students strongly enough, and because there is this kind of, I don't want to call it a culture, say, of silence, but almost a culture of, we'll push this under the rug. It's the kind of thing that happens, graduate school is a weird time that everyone hates, right? It kind of comes to a point where, reporting is a very, very risky thing. I think it's a very brave thing. I think it's something that should happen. But until universities really step up and support the students after they make a complaint, I just don't see this thing, I don't see it really moving forward in any significant way. And it's because it is so scary and it can be so damaging to make a claim that then if your professor doesn't get in trouble, well, suddenly, you wasted 3 years of your life in graduate school, and now you're not even going to be able to leave with any kind of degree, right? Because this university decided your professor was more trustworthy than you were.
Yeah.
Or, there wasn't enough evidence. It seems so, again, because of that power dynamic, it seems so lopsided, the trust that they give to the professor versus the support that they give to the student.
Yeah, and so the example you gave about small fields, some of the cases that I looked at, it was like, 100 would be amazing. Some of the cases, it's like, there might be 10 people in the world working in this field, and who knows where my professor is on that scale, of 10 people, but there's only 10, so they all talk to each other because they're all interested in the same exact thing. If I want to go into this field, I'm gonna need a recommendation from this person. One of the cases that we reported in the article is there was a woman who had been who was being harassed in a lab for a long time. We don't know a lot of the details about her role in the lab or anything like that, but a woman who was being harassed in the lab and eventually left the university, didn't make a complaint, and later was contacted as a witness to another investigation about the same person. And she said, well, look, when I left the university, I put a letter in my personnel file that said only to be opened in case someone is filing a harassment claim against the professor that I worked with, right? Like, she still needed a recommendation. She still needed to maintain a good personal relationship with a person, but she had been mistreated for a long time. And her solution was to put a letter in her personnel file, seal it, and, write across the seal, don't open unless, unless this thing is happening.
Right.
So the university investigation went back and found that, and they said, wow, that's here. And inside the letter was a bunch of descriptions about all the, all this harassment.
It's extremely smart of her, extremely smart and brave of her to do that, Yeah.
And a very difficult, choice to have to make, to
Absolutely.
Be like, do I just write something down? What do I do? Because even just putting it in writing, you could be retaliated against for later.
100%. It's interesting too with email. It's actually one area where this can maybe help in some ways, because there will be a paper trail, right? But so much communication happens one-on-one. So much, you go to conferences together. You're alone in the lab all the time. Like, there's so much, I think. It's so important that the people who are running these labs really treat their students as, as human beings, and as I don't know, in some ways, I think members of their family even. It's so important, I think, that you're going to be with this person. I saw my lab mates more than I saw my wife in graduate school. I saw them every single day. I saw them for 10, 12 hours a day. I'd come home, I would eat dinner, I'd hang out with my wife, and then, an hour later I'd be on the phone with my lab mates again, talking about, this machine broke, or this experiment didn't go well, or whatever. You're constantly in contact with these people. And so it very, very quickly, in some ways it can be very nice, because you build this rapport and build this feeling of camaraderie with other people. But at the same time, that can go sour so quickly, right? With such little kind of impetus, that when it does go bad, and again, we're not even just talking, like, I think, honestly, in my opinion, graduate students need significant protections outside of just sexual harassment is a huge issue. And it's, probably one of the worst types of harassment that can be kind of doled out on someone in this situation, right? But, graduate students are, again, the rights of graduate students are so completely limited. And on top of that, you can add in the secondary layer of a lot of these students are here from other countries and are only allowed in the United States on student visas.
Yeah.
Right? What happens when a student from Korea or China or India or Canada or Germany or wherever, right, decides, I've had enough of this professor, I'm going to make a report. And then the university says, well, sorry, we don't believe you. And also you have to go back to your home country. Right? I mean, it can be completely shattering. And so that's why it is so important, I think, that these groups get more protection. Did you at all look into, I know in the article you didn't really mention this, but did you look into at all the graduate student unionization efforts that are going underway?
I didn't. I was thinking about contacting the graduate student, what's it called, GAPSA at the university,
Sure.
But I didn't. We didn't end up having room in the article for it anyway. So.
Sure. No, yeah, I understand that. So for those that don't know who are listening, across the country right now, university graduate students are unionizing and deciding that they want to kind of get together and try to put an end to some of these abuses that occur, in things like, working 60 to 70-hour weeks, or, sexual harassment claims, or claims of verbal harassment, or just, unsafe working conditions, right? All these things that can happen to graduate students that currently, in some ways it's taken as almost like hazing, right?
Mhm.
Everyone that I complained to during graduate school, and again, thankfully I had nothing like, I had a great time in graduate school comparatively to some people, right? And especially people that have undertaken this or had this harassment occur to them. But when I would complain about graduate school about, we have long hours and getting paid so little and this is horrible and yada yada whatever, everyone I talked to just kind of, looked wistfully off into the distance and were like, graduate school was terrible. Everyone hates it.
Mhm.
I mean, I had people telling me, I remember I had a nervous breakdown in graduate school. Isn't it great? Like, no, it's not great. That's terrible. Like, why
Yeah.
we take it almost as a badge of honor that it sucked so bad for so many people, and I find it interesting that professors then, when they get to that level, don't try to make it a little bit better, but it's kind of built into the system, right?
Mhm.
Graduate work is cheap. There is a huge demand for it. And frankly, if, one person says they won't do it because they don't like the conditions, there's another 15 people willing to take that person's spot.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's kind of a perfect storm of where abuses can occur.
Right.
Really. I don't know. I find it so fascinating. So where do you hope, I guess, this story goes? What do you hope to see come out of this, and what other kind of reporting, I guess? So because really I had heard about this at other universities. Your article was the first time that I had specifically heard about it at the University of Minnesota. I haven't really been here in Minnesota for super long, but this was a school that I was looking to go into. This was a school whose research I always looked at and everything. Where do you kind of hope, I guess, to see this go forward? What kind of actions do you hope the university will take into place? And where do you see some, I guess, hope for this problem?
Yeah, I think that there are probably a few things from what I've seen in my reporting. There are probably a few things that could be improved upon. One would be the state law that keeps all these things private, because the state law that the Data Practices Act, it doesn't just apply to the University of Minnesota. It applies to all of the state departments. So the Department of Transportation, the Department of Natural Resources, the employees that work in the Capitol, all these other things. This same framework is in place for them. So if somebody in the DNR is harassing the people who work under them, it only becomes public if there's discipline. If somebody who works in the Capitol, same thing. So it doesn't just apply to the University of Minnesota. It applies to a lot of other workers in the state. And so that's one thing that could probably be looked at again. The personnel data section of the Data Practices Act governs all this, and it says the Data Practices Act is the Minnesota law that says, public information. Here's what public information is. Your tax dollars pay for it. So here's how it should be handled. The presumption of the act is that all public information should be made public, with some exceptions. And then there are sections that go into what the exceptions are. When it gets to personnel, people who work for the government in the state, it's the opposite. Everything is presumed to be private, with some exceptions. And the exception in this case is, when there's been discipline. But otherwise, if there hasn't been discipline, then it'll stay private. So things like that could use another look, I think, from our legislators. There's also the university policies that play into it. So the way that they handle discipline, the way that they handle the redactions, which is further down in the article, you can see that they have a lot of leeway. Yeah.
Yeah, it was interesting seeing those.
They have a lot of leeway to just redact whatever they want. And that's, again, the way state law works. But from the examples that we have, and if they want to provide more examples, I'm ready to receive them. But from the examples that we have, it doesn't seem to be extremely consistent, and it's not really clear what criteria they're using.
Sure. So what was I guess that's kind of a good final question, I guess, is that state law, does that require that places of work like the university keep these things private, or does it just allow them to? So in other words, it's legislated that it be kept private. Could the university be more open or transparent if they wanted to? Or is it this law that's keeping them from being able to do so?
No, yeah. So if the university tried to release more information about these cases, they could very easily be sued by the employees or by other people. So they are just following the law, and that's not their fault. They shouldn't be faulted for that. But if as a culture that law is not something that we like, then that's something we need to look at. So
sure, yeah, and of course, I guess of course you could go back to the view that, well, the university could always discipline, right? The university could mandate discipline in cases like this, right? Universities don't have, not just the University of Minnesota, of course, right, but all universities don't have a great track record when it comes to, sexual harassment claims are made against an athlete, against a professor, against an administrator, whatever. There really hasn't been, I think, and I think the data backs this up, they really have not done a phenomenal job of supporting those people that come forward and and making their voices heard and believed, and make them feel supported, even if ultimately the resolution of the thing is that, okay, well, there wasn't enough evidence to act on this, right? Just because there isn't enough evidence doesn't mean that you presume that the other person is lying, of course.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
They could, whatever. There could be all kinds of things going on, but it's interesting. Cool. Well, thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah.
Well, listeners, this has been a fascinating chat here with Micah Emmel-Duke, who wrote this article again, How the University of Minnesota Hides Its Professors' Sexual Harassment on City Pages. I think you're also a writer for occasional writer for the Star Tribune.
Yeah, I've done some, this was freelance for the City Pages, and also I've done some freelance for Star Tribune.
Cool. Okay. And if people want to get in contact with you about this story, about anything else they have about this kind of stuff, where can they reach you?
Yeah. My phone number is 612-293-5088, and I will take text messages, phone calls. If people are worried about security and privacy, they can download an app called Signal, and they can text me using that.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. And we're back.
Okay.
All right. So again, for those that are listening here, the article was on citypages.com, and it's How the University of Minnesota Hides Its Professors' Sexual Harassment.
Poop frosting. So, and
here's the thing too with this article is this is not even this is by far not the only case like this, right? So we have,
this is one of the many cupcakes of poop frosting that is out there.
Yeah. Now, for many listeners, you might remember a couple of cases that came out that were of particular importance, I guess you would say. The first one, in a weird way, was actually this article in Slate is really interesting. It's called "Shirt Storm" by Phil Plait, and it's, if you remember this, Marie, you might remember this too. The European Space Agency had this mission called Rosetta, and basically they landed a lander on an asteroid, I think, right? And it was on a comet. And it was super, super important news. And they had all these interviews and stuff with people. They had Matt Taylor, the mission's project scientist, went on the air to talk about his work, and the shirt he was wearing, I don't even know how to describe it. It is like one of those, if listeners, I know some of you out there were like me in middle school. You had those silk Dragon Ball Z shirts, right?
Wait. Hold on, I gotta Google this right this very moment.
Okay.
It's Slate shirt. What?
It's Matt Taylor shirt is I think what you should Google.
Okay, gotcha. Continue.
Okay, so this shirt, it's ridiculous, right? It's like these ladies in bikinis with like leather on and stuff, and they're it looks terrible. It's a terrible shirt. I cannot believe this guy wore it. I can't believe he wore it to work, let alone on like the most important day of his career, likely, right? And
wonder where he found that.
So actually, it's interesting. Ellie Prizeman, who is an artist, made the shirt for him. Right? She's a what's the word? She's like a Etsy shirt designer kind of thing. And so she designed this shirt for him, and he wore it. And like, it's fine, I guess, if you're, I don't know. I would never wear a shirt like that ever. I don't think it's in good taste. I think it's a stupid kind of shirt to wear. It's ridiculous. But he ended up
completely
though
tone deaf, right? I mean,
right.
Just completely like, again, like you could argue. Sorry, just to intervene really quickly, just because it's the first time I've seen this shirt. I mean, you could argue, hey, what's the big deal? Like he wore a shirt with some, who cares? Like, why is this even a big deal? And it's sort of like, again, it takes the idea of it. All of these actions are related, and you don't get to isolate something out and say something is not a big deal if it has the communication to 50% of the population that they are an object.
Well,
they're an object to be, even if the woman made the shirt, and even if his best girlfriends are like, no, Matt, you should go on. It looks great. You should totally wear that shirt. You have to be able to understand a bigger context that you're responsible for. And that's to me is like, that's, wow. Okay, please continue. I am just going to sit here and marvel this shirt.
So here's the issue, especially with, I think, this case, was that it is part of a broader problem in astronomy in particular, right? So astronomy seems to be one of the fields that has it almost the worst, which is really interesting. It has it's hard to tell if this is like, if this is true, or if this is, if this is real, or is this just kind of a, is this just like a parent bias or something, right? Or is this really an important, let me say this again. Is this real, or is this just a kind of confirmation bias thing, right? But here's the thing. Looking at studies, so this is from Survey of Academic Field Experiences, SAFE, Trainees Report Harassment and Assault. This is inappropriate comments at field sites. So 40% of men said they had never seen an inappropriate comment at a field site, and 20% of women said it was frequent. Another 20% said it happened regularly, and 40% said it happened rarely, and only 25% said it never happened to them for women. Now, the thing is that this is in an article here that was written by. This article is written by Clancy et al. So Catherine B.H. Clancy, Catherine M.N. Lee, Erica M. Rogers, and Christina Rishi. And so what they found, this is their abstract. So, quote, women generally and women of color specifically have reported hostile workplace experiences in astronomy and related fields for some time. However, little is known of the extent to which individuals in these disciplines experience inappropriate remarks, harassment, and assault. We hypothesize that the multiple marginality of women of color would mean that they would experience a higher frequency of inappropriate remarks, harassment, and assault in the astronomical and planetary science workplace. We conducted an internet-based survey of the workplace experiences of 474 astronomers and planetary scientists between 2011 and 2015 and found support for this hypothesis. In this sample, in nearly every significant finding, women of color experienced the highest rates of negative workplace experiences, including harassment and assault. Further, 40% women of color reported feeling unsafe in the workplace as a result of their gender or sex, and 28% of women of color reported feeling unsafe as a result of their race. Finally, 18% of women of color and 12% of white women skipped professional events because they did not feel safe attending, identifying a significant loss of career opportunities due to a hostile climate. Our results suggest that the astronomy and planetary science community needs to address the experiences of women of color and white women as they move forward in their efforts to create an inclusive workplace for all scientists.
Fascinating.
So, it's a very, very big problem, especially, and so here's the thing too. What they consider to be women of color were all non-white or European women, right? So this is Black or African American, Middle Eastern or Arab, Native American, American Indian, Alaska Native, Asian or Pacific Islander, Hispanic, Latino or Latina, multiracial, right? So they found that significantly, this was a big problem, and especially in astronomy, right? And the reason that astronomy has kind of been the focus for some of this is because a lot of very famous astronomers have been removed due to public backlash. And although some of them don't get removed at all, just like in this case, the University of Minnesota, right? So Jeff Marcy was a very famous professor at the University of California, Berkeley, who was in the running, in many people's minds, was in the running to be at least a Nobel laureate, right? He was found to have repeatedly, with four different women came forward and alleged these claims, but he reportedly basically gave them unwanted massages, groped them, kissed them, just made very uncomfortable situations for them, right? And
boy, it would be so much easier if we could talk about Black Solve right now, right?
I know, right? Seriously. Now, there's other cases, of course, too, right?
Right.
So there was Jeff Marcy was one. There was then another one at Caltech where the professor was it's not known exactly who this professor is, I don't think still, but Christian Ott is believed to be he's a theoretical astrophysicist, is believed to be the person, and Nature journal actually confirmed this. He was said to have been, again, same kind of thing, creating unsafe work environments for female graduate students. And but what occurred, though, was that this professor stayed at the university, right?
Oh, of course.
So and again, is another part of this huge problem, is that in many cases like this, right, the professor is allowed to stay.
It's repercussionless, right? And I think it's like, just to go back to the shirt, because now you've got me down the rabbit hole on this shirt. I just kind of, if I may read what the woman who actually did the shirt, made the shirt for him, was asked by Newsweek. And her name, again, I will find it. Ellie Prizeman, 34, based in England, is actually a tattoo artist, or she removes tattoos. She does some work like that, and somehow this knows the scientist and made the shirt, and is being asked by Newsweek, some say the shirt is sexist. What's your opinion? And she says, everyone is entitled to have an opinion. It would all be very boring if we all felt the same way about everything. I can see both sides of the coin in this debate. But as it is a style I am into, I don't see it as offensive. But that is just my view. It is up to us to empower ourselves. We can achieve anything we want to if we have the skills to put our mind to it. And then asked again, do you think it's wrong to complain that the shirt is sexist? Again, she says, everyone is entitled to their personal opinion. Sometimes I feel like people can take it too far and get nasty. I feel all views can be expressed adequately if it's done constructively. No one's opinion is wrong or right. It's the delivery of the opinion that I feel should be considerated. So right here you have, in my opinion, a woman who is reiterating sort of the depth of sexism, the depth of the bias, right? And that this is harmless, and it's someone's opinion, and that opinion is okay. The thing is it's not okay. Right. It's like if you put swastikas on a shirt and walked out with it, it wouldn't be okay, right? I mean, that's the thing that I think it's like, well, I can see both sides of the debate. No, it's not a debate. Like there's no gray area in something like that, because that gray area is what enables sexual assault in the workplace, because then there's a gray area, it's like, then professors, and people that perpetrate these crimes are not brought to any kind of any kind of justice or anything else. Or the women who have it happen are left feeling that they're in a gray area. Did it really happen? Does this even, what, did I bring it on? Was it my responsibility to be more forceful in saying no? And so it's like, this is what is so amazing is the depth of which it's permeated into women as well. And that to me is like, that's when you know it's just a caustic and it's an evil in a lot of ways, because her saying these things seems so rational and it seems so logical, but really it's not, you know?
It's part of the paradox of tolerance, right? Which was described by Karl Popper in 45. My philosopher of science crush. Karl Popper defined this in The Open Society and Its Enemies, Volume 1. He actually defined it in a note, which is really interesting because it's a very important idea that he had, but that's the kind of brain that Karl Popper had, that one of his notes is super important. Quote, less well known is the paradox of tolerance. Unlimited tolerance must lead to the disappearance of tolerance. If we extend unlimited tolerance even to those who are intolerant, if we are not prepared to defend a tolerant society against the onslaught of the intolerant, then the tolerant will be destroyed and tolerance with them. In this formulation, I do not imply, for instance, that we should always suppress the utterance of intolerant philosophies. As long as we can counter them by rational argument and keep them in check by public opinion, suppression would certainly be unwise. But we should claim the right to suppress them if necessary, even by force, for it may easily turn out that they are not prepared to meet us on the level of rational argument, but begin by denouncing all argument. They may forbid their followers to listen to rational argument, because it is deceptive, and teach them to answer arguments by the use of their fists or pistols. We should therefore claim, in the name of tolerance, the right not to tolerate the intolerant, end quote. So the basic idea is very similar to this kind of idea that if we, just because we want to be open to all ideas and we don't want to, we want to allow freedom of speech and things, does not mean that we have to be tolerant of the love of the suppression of speech.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Like there are still kind of absolutes out there that matter. And in this case, it's sort of, I think the argument about the shirt is even stranger to me, because if someone showed up to a job in that shirt, they should be fired. Right? Like, unless they're working at a tattoo parlor or a porn shop, like, it, to me, seems so ludicrous that this, like, you know what I'm saying?
I know exactly what you're saying. I feel like it is, and the funny thing is, like, again, as offensive as it is, up to us to empower ourselves. So again, it's this idea that you can overcome sexism. If sexism exists, you can overcome it just from sheer will. We can achieve anything we want to if we put our skills and mind to it, which is a lie.
Sure.
That's the lie, right? Because that's not the case for anybody. Whether, you can't achieve anything if you put your mind to it from sheer gumption. You will always have privilege or money or something that is going to be on your side that you are aware of, or not on your side that you're not aware of, or vice versa, and I think that's the pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You can do anything you put your mind to it. Crying about something like this only holds women back, and it makes us look like, shrill harpies, that type of thing. That's the root. That's the lie. And I think that it's so palatable to believe, because you want to believe that, hey, you know what? It doesn't exist. I can do anything I want. I get up in the morning. That's what I tell. That's what I tell other women. That's what I tell other men. That's what I tell my daughter. But the fact is that is not the truth. And every day you're reminded in some small way why it's not the truth. And myself, I'm reminded much less than women of color are reminded of it. Quite what I can only imagine is an ear-shattering soul crushing amount on a daily basis. And that's what I think shirts like this just get to sort of I don't want to say rub your nose in it, but just get to sort of be just that much more irritating.
Well, it becomes the problem, I think, again, of like, I mean, this is kind of something we touch on a lot in this show, which is, kind of just the base realities of like, of living in a world, right, that has facts. Some things are just not true, right? And one of those not truths, I think, I'm sorry, Horatio Alger, is the myth of, you can always pull yourself up from the bootstraps, right? That, the chances of a guy who's, just graduating high school in the middle of the United States, who isn't going to go to college, who, grew up in a family that never attended college, that, that person has a lot against them. And I think part of the problem, or maybe not part of the problem, I think part of the issue that kind of has been present in a lot of our discourse, politically at least right now, is that it feels like we have been so ingrained with the idea that it's all a competition, right? And that because whatever, a black kid has it worse in some instances than a white kid does, and because there's some black kids that have it better than some white kids, right? Because we have this idea of like, we're all competing with one another. It's like, by pointing out that someone else has had a rough time, you're in some ways like giving up that you had a rough time too, right? And so it's this idea, I think, that people have, or people want to have, where like it sucks for everyone but the Kardashians. and like you know what I mean? Yeah, it sucks. The poor keep getting poorer and we need to fix that. And just because you're not as poor as the guy down the road, or they're a little bit, you know what I mean? Like, all of us should be working together to make it better for everyone. Like, who, you know what I mean?
Well,
Like,
I think that idea of the bootstraps also lends into, there's not enough to go around, right? That there's only that our rights are like pie, right? Is my favorite analogy. And there's only so much,
right, the zero-sum game.
There's only so much to go around, which is a lie. Like, you having the right to marry, is great. And if gays and lesbians want to get married, that doesn't take away from your right to get married.
Right.
And that's the thing I've never, again, like, but I think that the two things, they feed off of one another. And it's a narrative that is emotionally easy to buy into and can make you feel like it feels like strength. And that's where I think you start to, that's where it starts to break down. I agree with you though. Yeah.
The wonderful thing, so one of the good things about burn some cars science, tonight. I think,
have a small riot out in the suburbs.
So one of the good things about science, in some ways, is that because we focus so much on things being right or true, there has been, though, a lot of wonderful advancements made by female researchers that in the past maybe were overlooked, that, have kind of come back to the forefront, right? So here's a couple of really cool ones that the Igor dug up for us here. So Jocelyn Bell Bernal discovered pulsars in 1967, and she actually got a Nobel Prize for that. Esther Letterberg was a microbiologist who discovered the lambda bacteriophage, which is basically she developed so much important stuff, really, that she worked with her husband, and her husband actually got a Nobel Prize for physiology or medicine. But her work was also extremely important, and she was overlooked for it. Chen Xiong Wu Sung Dao Li and Chen Nin Yang basically disproved the law of parity in quantum mechanics, right? Which is awesome, which is crazy, which is amazing. But again, in this case, Wu was left out of their 1957 Nobel Prize, even though she was fundamental to the idea.
All right.
Right?
I'm just over here. Wait, I'm just getting gas.
And then we have some other.
Just keep going.
We have some other ones here too. So Dr. Vera Rubin found the first empirical proof of dark matter. Right? She was rejected by Princeton initially when she applied for a graduate degree because their astronomy program did not accept women. That was in 1948, and they actually had that policy until 1975.
1975.
Yes, way later than they probably should have.
Yeah, you think?
Yeah. So Maria Margaret Kirsch lived in the 1600s and early 1700s. She discovered a comet in 1702, and her husband took the public credit for it, which is insane. And then Emmy Noether is one of the most influential figures in mathematical history. Einstein said she was the most important woman in the history of mathematics,
and then took credit for her entire discovery.
Well, yeah, she actually was not allowed to give a lecture under her own name for the beginnings of her career. So it's to say that these issues have gotten better, but I even have an experience I have a story from my own experience that made me so completely uncomfortable. I have never been sexually harassed or anything like that, but we had a professor come and give a talk at my university when I was in graduate school, and he is a super big name in his field. And he was giving a talk on his research, and he offhandedly mentioned, he was like, and then one day into my life came the most beautiful graduate student I'd ever seen. Right? He said this to a room full of graduate students, many of whom I think more than half of us were female. He said this at a lecture with, again, like a 50% female faculty, everything else, whatever. And then he was like, and then her work was so great that I married her, ha ha ha. And no one laughed, right? It was just super uncomfortable. And afterwards, everyone was like, what was that?
Oh, yeah.
Like, what was that about? That is disgusting. Like, it still happens. It still happens. And the important thing, I think, is that it is great that things are changing and things are getting better, but the evidence is everywhere that it still happens. So us as young people in the sciences, as people starting their careers off, whatever, we just have to have a zero tolerance policy for this kind of stuff, right? Like, if you see something like that, you should say something to someone, right? So I know when that happened, so many of us went to our advisors and were just like, that was uncomfortable and weird. I mean, it can just be something as simple as that. And
I think if it does happen to you, that you should, take the time to hear your own voice about why something makes you uncomfortable, and know that you're not alone in that discomfort, right? Because the thing that happens a lot is you feel like you've misunderstood, that you're wrong, you won't be heard. And I think it's time for women to put down, or to work together to put down, that whole burden that we've been carrying for so long. Yeah. And start to say, this is not appropriate, and tell people and get your stories out there, because the more you hear about other experiences, the more you have a voice, and the more you use that voice for whatever you want to say, the more you find that you're not alone, and that there's a lot of people out there that not only have shared experiences, but also do not believe that they have no tolerance for that type of behavior. So that's what I would encourage.
Sure.
And I know that it's hard, you know, and it's hard too when you are a younger person. I think that is something, and I am encouraged by seeing like the generation after mine definitely having more of a voice about things like that. So I applaud that. And now I'm gonna go. And now I'm just gonna go burn down some cars. Now I got my Molotovs all set up, and I've got my handkerchief for covering my face. You know, I just got to get the sitter to take care of Julia, unless she wants to come with me, which is totally fine. You know, that's good too.
Goodness. All right. We also though, if you do have a complaint like this, I mean, what happened at the University of Minnesota does happen at other universities too. Oftentimes the department may not be your best source or your best recourse. I would suggest you reach out to some other organizations too. You know, there's a lot of good places that you can do.
Reporter.
You can find that stuff.
No, seriously.
Well,
the thing too is, it's like, if you want to be, there's nothing wrong with that. If you feel like this is a story, if you feel like this needs to be known, you should make it known. It should be known. It should be known.
Yeah, for sure. Anyways, great. Well, listeners, thank you so much for listening. Next week, we announce the listener who won the painting.
The haunted painting.
The haunted painting, which is very, very exciting.
It's resting in a pool of,
and we'll be back in 1 week.
Sticky red fluid. I think maybe blood.
Terrifying. And we'll be back in another week with an episode on economic collapse, getting back to some crazy conspiracy junk.
Yeah, and one of these days we're going to do
exciting.
Something, I don't know, light and fun. Economic collapse.
One of these days. Let's do something that light and fun.
No, I'm teasing.
Cool. All right. Thanks so much for listening. Bye. Thank you again, dear listeners, for listening to the Mad Scientist podcast. I have been your host, Chris Cogswell, joined by my co-host,
Marie Mayhew.
If you'd like to contact the show, please send us an email at themadscientistpodcast@gmail.com. That's all one word. You can also follow us on Twitter at MadScientistPod or at Team Giant Squid for Marie. And of course, you can see us on Facebook, on Instagram, and all over the internet as the Mad Scientist Podcast. And again, our logo is the one with the pumpkin head, so it's easy to see. If you've enjoyed the show tonight, please consider supporting us on Patreon, where the money that you give to us will help us to promote this show further, to make it better, and just to spend more time making it.
Because we love doing that.
We do love doing that. Our logo was designed by Carrie Shaheen. Our web design is done by Desdemona Howard.
Woohoo!
And our sound design is done by Jake Cardinal. Thanks again for listening.
Thank you. This has been a Damn It Chippy production.